Welcome to Small Talk by Sfarim Chatter. I'm Nachi Weinstein. On this episode of Small Talk, I'm going to be joined by Rabbi Yosef Weisenfeld, who is the author of the newly published sefer Derech Ho'ir, the Halachos of Facing Yerushalayim, published, or actually distributed, by Feldheim. So we'll be discussing this new sefer, which is written in English with extensive Hebrew footnotes. So thank you, Rabbi Yosef, for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. I do have to mention to you that I have a brother-in-law that runs a Sfarim store. And he told me that when a sefer is on Sfarim Chatter, he always notices afterwards the uptick in people of all stripes coming in, interested in the sefer. Do you have it? Can we see it? And that's fantastic. It means that you're doing your job. You are reaching a audience that is truly interested in Sfarim. So yasher koach to you.
Thank you, and Be'ez Hashem, this will help tell people about the sefer, and those interested will be able to purchase online at Feldheim or go to the Sfarim store and pick it up. Okay, so what can you tell the listeners about this sefer Derech Ir and why you decided to write this sefer?
Okay, this was a topic like many Sfarim that started not as something that I had any idea that I would write about. It was simply a topic that came up. I flew to Eretz Yisrael. I began talking with someone. The plane goes north. It's an interesting phenomena because we wouldn't imagine, just looking at a map, we wouldn't imagine that the plane should go north. And that leads to the question of, should we be facing east, as it would seem from a map, or perhaps we should be facing north? I started telling the person different shittas I had heard, and he started questioning me. What's the reason behind these different opinions? And as I started looking into it, I discovered that this was a topic that was heavily, heavily misunderstood, even by many who were writing about the topic. Discussed with some of my Rebbeim and Rabbonim, this topic, as I've discussed other topics, specifically with this topic, a couple different Rabbonim told me, this needs to be written down. This needs to be explained to the tzibur at large.
So that leads to the question that when I told you this off air, when I saw the sefer come out, I posted about it on Sfarim Chatter, on Twitter, and on WhatsApp, and I said, Derech Ir, the Halachos facing Yerushalayim. I was like, okay, we just face east. We just face Mizrach. Why don't we just face Mizrach? And I'm sure that's what many listeners are thinking right now. You're smiling. Many listeners are like, yeah, just face Mizrach. What's need a whole sefer on this?
Okay, so Mizrach at its core is a corruption of the idea that we're supposed to face Yerushalayim. Mizrach was not historically an ideal in earlier Jewish history. In fact, the Gemara Bavli and the Gemara Yerushalmi record that it's forbidden to face Mizrach. And they consider that to be a custom of the idol worshippers, which is forbidden to us. And there's discussion in the later Achronim. Moshe Feinstein writes about it in Dibris, now reprinted in Igris Chelik Tes. But there's discussion of whether we are even allowed to be facing Mizrach. But all that discussion would be relevant to a place where someone facing Mizrach is in fact facing Yerushalayim. And before we discuss if Mizrach is permitted or forbidden, the first step would be to analyze from our location, where is Yerushalayim? Back in Europe, when the early Jewish communities came to Europe, that's where the idea of Mizrach began. And Mizrach was accurate in the southern parts of Europe. As Klal Yisrael spread through Europe, it became a little less accurate and led to a machlokes and achronim about how exact you need to be. Should we be facing Eretz Yisrael precisely? Is approximate good enough? This became a debate in the achronim, but then it spread even further into parts of Russia that were further east than actually Eretz Yisrael itself, and where the practice was certainly an error. And then when Klal Yisrael came to the United States, the practice continued from Europe to the United States. And, when you take a quick look at a map, not only does it look accurate, it looks more accurate than it did in Europe. So it was a very natural thing for this minig of Mizrach to continue to the United States and take on, almost an ideal in and of itself.
as you're saying, the Iker is facing Eretz Yisrael, facing Yerushalayim, not necessarily based on Mikdash, not necessarily facing Mizrach. And as you have a chapter, as you just mentioned, chapter 3 is avoiding Mizrach, and you discuss the whole issue of Mizrach, and you go through Chazal, etc. Okay. That being said, how does one determine where Yerushalayim is, where Eretz Yisrael is, and what the proper way to face it without just saying blanket Mizrach?
Mm-hmm. So that's a fantastic opening to the conversation. And a lot of the Metzias here is very counterintuitive. Without, sitting with the globe, it would be pretty quick and easy to demonstrate. And I've done demonstrations for many Rabbonim, for many audiences. I have a variety of props and such that can be used to quickly show the reality, the Metzias, to an audience. When we're having just a conversation, it's a bit more difficult to quickly put down the Metzias in such a way that everyone will immediately understand it. But I'll ask a couple questions just to open the minds of our listeners. For example, we mentioned a moment ago, the airplanes fly northeast. The airplanes go over the coast of Canada on their way to Eretz Yisrael. If a straight line from here to Eretz Yisrael would be primarily to our east and a bit to the south of that, as it certainly seems when you look at a map, then why is it that the flights are not going that way? I mean, we know they care about the price of a gallon of gas. That's certainly on the mind of the airlines, and that's not something that they're going to play games with. And I've heard a variety of theories to explain this. Just the number of different theories I've heard shows that this is something that people are curious about. But actually, once someone understands the Metzias here, they'll realize that the reason airplanes are flying over the coast of Canada is because that is the straight line from here to Eretz Yisrael. Yes, Eretz Yisrael is to our south. The straight line from here to Eretz Yisrael heads north over the coast of Canada. And a second question, just to help the listener understand that there's more to direction than they may have initially thought. We know, for example, I'll ask you, which way is the sun in the morning? Sunrise. From which direction does the sun rise?
East.
East. The sun rises east. Where in the world is the sun located?
Over the equator.
Yeah, the sun is over the equator. It goes a bit north of that in the summer, a bit south of that in the winter, but primarily the sun is located over the equator. And where is the equator compared to the United States?
South.
South. So the sun is over the equator to our south. And yet, it makes sense actually, most of the day we see the sun to our south, southeast, southwest, but primarily we see the sun to our south. But somehow in the morning, by sunrise, we're looking east and we're seeing an object located to our south. And just to make it better, in the summertime, sunrise is northeast and sunset is northwest. And yet the sun is still to our south. The sun is always further south than the entire United States, including in the summertime when the sun does move a bit north of the equator, but still south of the United States. So we get up in the morning, we look towards the sun by sunrise, get up for early morning nates in the summertime, 5 o'clock, and you're looking northeast and seeing an object located to your south. How does that happen? What explanation can allow an object that's to our south be seen to our north? At the exact same time that we're seeing it to our northeast, it's around Chatzos Hayom in Eretz Yisrael, and someone in Eretz Yisrael looking at the sun is looking south. So I'm north of the sun, yet I'm looking north, and there's someone located to my south looking at the same sun at the same time, and he's looking south. These questions should at least open the curiosity of the listener to realize that there is a lot more to direction than we may have thought before beginning the conversation.
Okay, so with that being said, and being that we're just on a small talk here, and like you said, really this would do well on a video, but for now it's just an audio, so we don't have the globe and your props. How does one determine, why then do we just face Mizrach, east, And how does one determine the direction of Yerushalayim? Again, specifically, we're really focusing this conversation. I should say that we're in Lakewood, and this is in New Jersey, in the United States. Obviously, if you're elsewhere in Israel, the question changes. But let's just focus, or wherever you are. Let's just, again, focus that we're recording this in Lakewood, and we're in New Jersey. So how do we determine? And also, I want to point out that in your book, which we'll get to more specifics of it, but the Sefer, this is really the second part, determining the direction of Yerushalayim, and you have a number of chapters going through this. But how does one answer your questions and determine why do we face east? How do we determine Yerushalayim? And there's different shittas on this.
In recent years, there's been a lot of discussion on the topic. In fact, in the beginning of the second half of the Sefer, I list some 25 or so Mar Mekomos that have previously discussed this topic for someone who wants to get into the background of the discussion and what's been said until now. But in my view, and the idea of facing east in America is an error. We should not be facing east. We can discuss if there's a justification. There is a justification, but primarily the ideal is to face Eretz Yisrael, which is located to our northeast. There has been conversation about, in fact, I would say the primary discussion of the Sefer is the rum line versus great circle debate. So are we using a rum line or a great circle to face Eretz Yisrael? So the terms themselves can be a bit misleading, but the shortest possible description is that a great circle is a straight line on a globe, or any ball. But the globe, our world is a globe, and a straight line on the globe is described as a great circle. I explained in the book why it got that name. That's the name for a straight line on a globe, which is a straight line in reality. On a map, a straight line drawn on a map is referred to as a rum line. Now, although the straight line drawn on the map is not straight in reality, someone following a rum line, if someone was in a car trying to follow a rum line, they would need to turn their steering wheel, whereas someone following the great circle could drive straight without adjusting the steering wheel. Still, there is something that the rum line has that the great circle does not, which is the great circle is constantly changing direction. Although you are traveling straight, meaning you are not turning right, you are not turning left, but as the plane flies to Eretz Yisrael, the compass is changing. It's first showing northeast, then it's showing east, then it's showing southeast. A rum line is a line where the compass doesn't change. Throughout the trip, you're heading east or a drop south of east until you get to Eretz Yisrael. So the compass is showing a consistent direction throughout the trip. However, in order to follow that route, you're going to have to turn your steering wheel. It's not going to work if you try to drive straight. So we're forced to choose. Are we going to take the route that is straight, or are we going to take the route that maintains a consistent direction? In recent years, primarily the past 28 years, since an article on this topic was written by Rabbi Yehuda Hershkowitz in the second Chelek of Yeshurun, from that time forward, it became a topic that Rabbanim spoke about, and there's been different opinions and a lot written on the topic. But as we go through the Achronim, the pre-war Achronim on this topic, it's unanimous. All the Achronim that address the topic at all are all on the team of the Great Circle, the true straight line, with several Achronim even writing that sometimes this will mean disregarding the compass direction. Some Achronim write that you could be north of Eretz Yisrael and still be required to turn to your north. So this Sefer was written primarily to clarify what these Achronim are saying. Some of them are a bit hard to read. The Shulchan Aruch Harav has a lengthy piece on this topic, which many Rabbanim have found challenging, and a couple of Rabbanim have reached out to me after the printing of the Sefer to thank me specifically for this, specifically for making the Shulchan Aruch Harav accessible to everyone to read and understand. And that's very much the goal of the Sefer. This was a topic previously that was somewhat exclusive to those intellectuals that would deal with Kiddush HaChodesh and types of sugyas similar to that. And the goal with this Sefer is to make it an easy topic to understand for anyone, even for people that are not necessarily experts in Zmanim and Sugya similar to that. And to that end, there are many pictures and very easy descriptions in the book to make it a topic that's no longer exclusive to intellectuals. And everyone can read the book and see what exactly did the Achronim say on this topic.
And you also, right away when you open the book, you see there's a colored title page. But not only that, throughout, there's pictures of globes and maps, and you have longitude and latitude, and you're explaining what everything is. And then when you have the chapter 2 of part 2, True Direction of Yerushalayim, you have what you explained, the rum line and the straight line. You have it on a color map going from New York to Eretz Yisrael, and you have it showing the two different ones, one in red and one line in blue. So you can see the difference and distinction between the two. And you have a compass and the globe, and you have aerial images, everything in color. It's really laid out beautifully. You really, really could see. You have different timings. I mean, everything is really laid out and, again, discussed in detail, and you can see it. Actually, I said before that all the notes are in Hebrew. It's not true. Some of them are in English, the notes, and then the sources, really, the Marmakaimis are really in Hebrew, that he really did. And you have, and again, as you said, you have the different shitas there, especially you have a chapter on the Shulchan Aruch, as you said, you have one on the Levush, and the Levush's calculations, and you have True Direction of Yerushalayim, etc. Now, you actually have a line-by-line translation of that Shulchan Aruch. Now, just, I guess, to end this part of the discussion, before we get into some of the other parts of the discussion, which is, which is funny, because we're focusing on the second part, which I think jumps out right away when you see the book. Even though the first part, you have halachos of kiva and tefillah, which we're going to get to in a minute. But what is the true direction? So, somebody here in Lakewood or someone in New York, where are they supposed to be facing? They just hear, Mizrach, take a compass app, and look, you're saying, no.
Yeah.
What's the real direction?
The conclusion of Sefer Derech Ha'ir is that
Spoiler.
Facing east is primarily an error. It's not the precise direction to Eretz Yisrael. The precise direction to Eretz Yisrael is northeast. There is the date in the Achronim. If we have to be exact, if approximate's good enough, and according to the Achronim that approximate will be good enough, then east would be good enough as well. Just like in Europe, where it was really southeast, but the Achronim justified facing east. So too for us, although it's northeast, the defense of the Achronim that allow for approximate would work in our favor as well, and east could be allowed using that defense. As would be expected, putting out a book that says that many of our shuls and a idea that we grew up with as obvious and poshut is an error, it certainly had created a bit of a stir. Within 1 week of putting out the Sefer, there was signs up on every bulletin board in BMG, put out by someone anonymous, trying to explain why the Sefer got everything wrong. It was kind of humorous. I really wish the person would have put his name. It's easier to take things seriously. People who know me know that when I write something, I always put my name on it. Even if it's sometimes uncomfortable, but when I write something, my name is on it, and it's a shame that this person chose otherwise. But really, all he did was bring out one or two obvious points that were all addressed already in the book, and I do hope one day he'll read the book and get back to me with what he thinks post reading it.
Yeah, stay by your word. Don't be a keyboard warrior. So, also for those that haven't seen the book or those who want to see it, in the end of the book, you have an appendix of the proper direction, city by city. So you have a whole list in Eretz Yisrael, a whole list in the United States of America, and it's not only like your classic New York, Lakewood, and Muncie, and Five Towns, whatever. No, it has every state. You have like Montgomery, Alabama, and you're going through Connecticut. You have Georgia, and you have Hawaii. You have every Michigan, Kentucky, every state. It goes to every single state, and then you have worldwide again. You're going down Afghanistan, Albania, Algeria, Andorra, Angola. You're going down to Bhutan. You literally have, you just went through making sure everyone can see, and you put in the degrees and which way it's supposed to be to face. Okay.
Yeah, there was a printing mistake, and Zambia did not get its city listed. If anyone is in Zambia and needs to know which direction to face, please reach out to me at my email address printed in the beginning of the book.
And I'll put your email address in the show notes for those interested in reaching out to you and anyone who wants to ask you any questions about it. And, of course, I will also link to the book in the show notes for those interesting. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the halachas here. Even though it's small talk, we'll go a little bit longer. Let's get some interesting material here for those interested in hearing this. So, at what point during davening should one face Yerushalayim?
We all know that primarily, minhag is to face Yerushalayim by Shemona Esrei. That's the primary time, and that's when everyone in the shul will stand up and turn to face the front of the shul, which hopefully is facing Eretz Yisrael. And there's strong basis for that. If we look in Shulchan Aruch, we'll see that the halachos of Kivun Atfila, of which way to face for davening, are not discussed until Siman Sadi Dalid, which is well after much of davening, Birchas Kriya Shema, and right before the Halachos of Shmona Esrei. So clearly the Torah and Shulchan Aruch seem to be of the opinion that the halacha facing Eretz Yisrael is intended primarily for Shmona Esrei. But it is surprising. The source, the idea of facing Eretz Yisrael comes from Shlomo HaMelech. When he built the first Beis HaMikdash, he davened to Hashem that any tefillah said at the Beis HaMikdash or facing the Beis HaMikdash should be accepted by Hashem. And the Navi tells us that Hashem came to Shlomo HaMelech, that Shlomo HaMelech only had a nevuah from Hashem twice in his lifetime. This was the second time. Hashem came to him and told him that he accepted this request, meaning that Hashem will accept the tefillos said at the Beis HaMikdash or facing the Beis HaMikdash. And that's the reason why we try to aim all of our shuls towards the Makom Mikdash. But Shlomo HaMelech davened that all tefillos, all requests that are said towards the Beis HaMikdash should be accepted. So it is a bit of a surprise that the standard minig has become to face Eretz Yisrael specifically by Shmona Esrei. And in fact, as we look through the Achronim, we find that there are many that felt differently. Interestingly, Rabbeinu Avram ben Harambam writes at length about this and says that he cannot imagine that there's any chacham in the world that thinks that Shlomo HaMelech was referring specifically to Shmona Esrei, and writes quite passionately that we should be facing Eretz Yisrael for all types of personal requests, whether it's a small tefillah as we go about our day, whether it's Birchas Kriya Shema he even mentions benching as a time that someone should be facing Eretz Yisrael. So there are many sources, and that's discussed in the book, but certainly the minig of facing Eretz Yisrael primarily by Shmona Esrei is well sourced and is a proper custom, although there may be benefit to facing Eretz Yisrael at other times as well.
What does someone do if they realize in the middle of Shemon Esrei, and this happens, that, I'm not facing Eretz Yisrael now?
So this is a debate in the Achronim, and it's interesting. The debate primarily gets involved in how serious of an offense is it to move your feet during Shemona Esrei. So that gets into technicalities, but just for the bottom line, Mishnah Berurah says that a person who's davening alone should continue in the direction he's already facing, even though he's not facing the right way. Whereas someone who's davening in a shul and everyone's facing one way and he's facing a different way, that's going to create a bit of a disturbance, and therefore it's proper for that person to turn around and face the same direction everyone else is facing, even though it means moving his feet during Shemona Esrei, and even when someone is unable to turn around and face Eretz Yisrael, let's say he's already in middle and he's at home, or there aren't other people facing a different way, so the Mishnah Berurah said not to turn. The Mishnah Berurah still recommends turning one's head, if possible, towards Eretz Yisrael.
Now, what to do when the Aron Kodesh is not facing Yerushalayim, and this is especially based on our first conversation, because now that we're out of order in the book, so we're doing part 1 after part 2, and you realize that you're in the shul and it faces Mizrach, and hold on, they just heard you read the Sefer Derech here, and wait, that's the wrong way, I'm not supposed to be facing this way, so now what do you do?
Absolutely, a very, very common question, which, there's a shul in Passaic that has 4 different Batei Medrash where you could daven in, and of the 4 Batei Medrash, you have the choice of 3 different directions. And I always felt, this is America, the place of free choice. If they have 4 Batei Medrash, why aren't there 4 different directions? But okay, one of the 3 is correct, but the other 2... one of the 4 is correct, but the other 3 Batei Midrashim are not correct. And there are shuls there's a shul in Waterbury that faces west, and the minyan there faces the Aron Kodesh during most of the year. But there's a Hasidic minyan that comes in the summer, and they face the back of the shul. It's the early minyan is the regular minyan facing the Aron Kodesh, and then the later minyan is the Hasidic minyan, which is facing the back of the shul. So we find, in fact, that this is this is a bit of a sugya. The Achronim seem to all agree that we're supposed to face Eretz Yisrael irrespective of the Aron Kodesh. which is they write that the Aron Kodesh should be put the way we're going to be facing, because it's a covet to the Aron Kodesh that we should be facing the Aron Kodesh. But we don't determine the direction of davening based on the Aron Kodesh. Rather, we determine the Aron Kodesh based on the direction of davening. Still, the Mishnah Berurah does seem to conflict himself a little bit on this topic, and therefore different Rabbanim who learn the sugya may come out with different opinions on exactly what the Mishnah Berurah intends. My understanding, and others have understood, as I wrote in the Sefer, that the Mishnah Berurah is really referring back to an earlier machlokus. We discussed there is a machlokus in Achronim if need to be exact, or if approximate is good enough. So when the Mishnah Berurah said to ignore the Aron Kodesh and face Yerushalayim, then he was referring to a shul where the Aron Kodesh was totally wrong, where all the Achronim would agree that this Aron Kodesh is no good. When the Mishnah Berurah said to face the Aron Kodesh and not turn away from the Aron Kodesh, there he was referring to a shul where the Aron Kodesh was facing east in Europe, but really in Europe it should be southeast, and therefore it's close enough, lefi many Achronim. And the Mishnah Berurah seems to be of the opinion that it's preferable to rely on the Achronim that say that approximate is sufficient. That's preferable than turning away from the Aron Kodesh. Still, the Mishnah Berurah is acknowledging that the Shura Sadin is that we ignore the Aron Kodesh and face Yerushalayim, and therefore, if the Aron Kodesh is completely wrong, then in that scenario, we would want to face Eretz Yisrael and not Yerushalayim, and not the Aron Kodesh. However, all this is talking about a tzibur. What should the shul do? Which is not a question that most of us are faced with. Most of us are faced with the question of what should I do? Everyone in this room is facing the Aron Kodesh. The Aron Kodesh is facing west. What should I do? That gets involved in a separate machlokas achronim. It gets very interesting. Usually we would say al tifrosh min hatzibur, but here the Gemara tells us that someone who wants to be wealthy should face north, and someone who wants to become a chacham in Torah should face south. And therefore, some achronim point out, imagine both those guys in the same shul. They're going to be facing back to back, which might tell us that the idea of al tifrosh min hatzibur doesn't apply when it comes to how someone should stand in a shul. And therefore, perhaps we should ignore everyone in the room and just face Eretz Yisrael. And that is the opinion of some achronim. The Mishnah Berurah, however, says to face the direction that the tzibur is facing, and again, says you can turn your head towards Eretz Yisrael if possible.
Now let's turn to a question that really is the culmination of a lot of things we've been discussing. Now, I want to mention you also discussed Kiddush Levana and Netilas Lulav. There's a chapter on that. There's a bunch of other chapters. There's a bunch, windows facing Yerushalayim. There's some other interesting chapters here, and then there's some other appendices. So but just the basic, the last final question that really discusses the Teichen of the book, which is the culmination of a lot of things, is the Kaisel. You get to the Kaisel. What do you mean? The Kaisel? What kind of question is this? Well, let's talk about why this is really the culmination of everything we've been discussing.
Absolutely. What's fascinating about the Kosel is that it actually does seem to incorporate many of the shilas that are affected, throughout the world, all in one place into one shul, so to speak, that everyone's familiar with, and it has all the shilas that could be discussed in the entire topic. Maybe not all of them, but very many, all rolled into one. So the first question that we need to ask ourselves is, well, where was the Beis Hamikdash? Now, that itself is a topic worthy of a sefer, and Sfarim have been written on that topic. But the predominant opinion today, I shouldn't say today, the predominant opinion always was and remains that the Beis Hamikdash is located, the Kodesh HaKadoshim was located on the spot which is today referred to as the Dome of the Rock. And that spot is very much to the left of someone standing in today's Kotel Plaza. And therefore, a strong argument can be made, and has been made, that someone standing in the Kosel should be facing not straight in front of them, but actually turned about 45 degrees, which is about half of a turn to his left, in order to be facing the Kodesh HaKadoshim directly. And while that has been discussed, and some have suggested that actually would be proper, I list a variety of reasons why it would seem that there is full justification to the idea of facing the kosel directly. Firstly, some have written that the kedusha of the kosel itself requires us to face it and not turn away from it. That seems to be a little bit of a difficult svara to swallow. We see that even when it comes to the Aron Kodesh, the Achronim don't feel that way, and the kosel doesn't whatever level of kedusha it has doesn't seem to match the kedusha of the actual Makom HaMikdash. And we know that the Gemara tells us that someone the Gemara which introduces the topic of Kivun HaTfilah tells us that someone who's standing in Chutz La'aretz should face Eretz Yisrael. Someone who's in Eretz Yisrael should face Yerushalayim. Someone who's in Yerushalayim should face the Mikdash. And therefore, it would seem that facing the kosel is insufficient. We should be turning left towards the actual place where the Mikdash stood. But there are a variety of defenses. Firstly, the term Mikdash seems to be a very wide term that can include the whole Har Bayis. In fact, if you look in the Yerushalmi doesn't say to face the Mikdash when you're in Yerushalayim. The Yerushalmi says to face the Har Bayis. And it seems that the Bavli's Mikdash means the same thing. I have extensive footnotes on that point, demonstrating that when the Bavli says Mikdash, it often refers to the entirety of the Har Bayis. And therefore, that brings us to another question. When the Gemara said someone's in Eretz Yisrael should face Yerushalayim, and someone in Yerushalayim should face the Mikdash, and all backing up, someone in Chutz La'aretz should face Eretz Yisrael, is that the entirety of the game, or is that just the first step, but you're supposed to keep going? So let's say, if we're in Lakewood, it's a little bit silly to discuss if we should face Eretz Yisrael or Yerushalayim, because the level of precision that such a question would require makes the question basically irrelevant. But if someone's close to Eretz Yisrael, let's say someone is Me'ever LeYarden, he could easily turn to face Yerushalayim, or he could turn and face Tel Aviv. Is there any specific requirement or advantage to facing Yerushalayim directly? Or can he say, no, the Gemara just says that if you're in Chutz La'aretz, you should face Eretz Yisrael, and that's sufficient. So that question will play out here as well. You're in the Yerushalayim, you're at the Kotel, that means you're in Yerushalayim. Is it sufficient to face the Har Bayis, or we're going to try to go to the next step, which what the Gemara says, someone who's on the Mikdash should face the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That's one question. Another question, as we discussed earlier, do we need to be exact? Is approximate good enough? And it does seem like the minig of facing the kosel directly is very much in parallel to the minig in Europe of facing east and not being precise to face southeast and to try to be exact. And someone facing the kosel is sufficiently facing towards the Mikdash to the extent that the Achronim that allow approximate would say that that's sufficient. There's a variety of other explanations as well. The bottom line is that it would seem that a person should face the kosel directly together with the majority of the tzibur, and once again he can turn his head in the direction of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which is to his left. I often joke that the Achronim are so into this idea of turning your head to one side, to the extent actually that the Bir Halacha writes that if someone has no idea where Eretz Yisrael is, someone wakes up one day on an island, he has no idea where he is, he doesn't remember how he got there, so he doesn't know where Eretz Yisrael is, which way should he face? So the Bir Halacha says, stand facing one direction and turn your head to another direction. Why? Because that way you have two chances of getting it right. If your body is facing Eretz Yisrael, good, and if it's not, well, maybe your head is. So the Achronim are really into this idea. It comes up in other topics when they talk about Harotz Lahachkim Yadrim. Someone wants to face south for Chachma. How can you do that if you're required to face Eretz Yisrael? So there again, the Achronim say, well, your body one way, your head a different way. So it got to the point where I was joking that, the Sefer could be sponsored by a chiropractor because they're the ones that might actually gain a lot of business off of these halachos.
Okay, so what about the Haskamas? You have a number of Haskamas here on the Sefer. Any that you want to particularly point out and mention?
Yeah, Baruch Hashem, the Haskamas are very strong, Baruch Hashem, and that is to a large extent because I came to these Rabbanim with the globe and the props and was able to give a very clear demonstration of the Metzias. Again, as I mentioned in the book, when beginning this topic, Bechil Zilber, who brought up this topic 50 years ago and was probably the first one to point out that America is making a mistake, He wrote, Nitil at Safan v'loy l'dorim b'mekoymei shem Yosef at Safan Eretz Yisrael nir kechida stuma ma'oid af be'ena yoyde dover. Facing north, when you're already to the north, looks like an impossible puzzle even to the educated. Ubanu lahavir es ha'inyan she'emes ein ze el metzias pshuta she'yochel kol echa liris be'enav. But we're going to come to explain the topic that in reality, it's a simple metzias that anyone could see with their eyes. You know, a picture's worth 1,000 words. In our case, a picture might be worth 1,000 chapters. But it really is something that when you have a globe or if you have the pictures, you can look at and see clearly. And when I went to the Rabbanim with the globe and the props and gave a clear demonstration, I was able to, Baruch Hashem, get haskamas that people didn't expect a sefer of this sort to be able to get. One particular interesting one was of Shlomo Miller. I reached out to Shlomo Miller because there was a previous kuntris on this topic called Gevurus Moshe from Rabbi Gabriel Getz. He's now in Phoenix, Arizona. And he went through this topic, and he quoted a tshuva from Rabbi Shlomo Miller. Rabbi Shlomo Miller wrote a tshuva specifically for his kuntris. And Rabbi Shlomo Miller wrote that we should follow the Rum line, which is not what all the Achronim are saying. So I arranged a meeting with his son, Rabbi Avraham Miller, and after presenting the whole sugya, Rabbi Avraham Miller was able to arrange for me a meeting with Rabbi Shlomo Miller. And I presented to him with the globe, the props, and fascinatingly, unlike almost everyone that I've sat with who was surprised, at least at some level, was surprised at the Metzias being presented, Rabbi Shlomo Miller was fully expert on this Metzias before I walked in. Till today, I have not met anyone else other than Rabbi Shlomo Miller that was a complete expert on this Metzias, and without any mistake whatsoever, a full and complete understanding of this Metzias. What he was surprised by, though, was the Shulchan Aruch Harav. And after going through the Shulchan Aruch Harav with him, he agreed that this Shiloh already has a psak in the Achronim, by Gedolei Achronim, like the Shulchan Aruch Harav. And after that, he wrote a very strong haskama to the Sefer, which Baruch Hashem led as well, to an easier time with other haskamas. So, and one other one that was very helpful to me was Rav Meir Arava in Eretz Yisrael. He's the mechaber of the Sfarim Meir Oiz, a lengthy set of Sfarim written on Mishnah Berurah, and he was very close with Reb Chaim Kanievsky. In fact, in the Reb Chaim Kanievsky biography, there's a page or two dedicated to the relationship between Reb Chaim Kanievsky and Rav Meir Arava. And I had seen in Rav Meir Arava's Sfarim that he had discussed this exact shiloh with Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and that Reb Chaim Kanievsky paskined that we go with the Great Circle and that someone in America should face northeast. So I reached out to him as well, and he wrote a very nice letter to me. The Rav Meir Arava wrote a nice letter to me explaining exactly how he asked the shiloh to Reb Chaim and what the response was, and that someone in America should face northeast.
So, being that we run long, and I think this is the longest small talk yet, so there's definitely more to get to that we're leaving here. So, I usually end off asking two questions. One, I think, is self-explanatory, so I won't ask, which is, what are you trying to accomplish with the Sefer? I think you've made that very clear throughout the episode. But finally, who is the Sefer meant for? As I mentioned, there's halacha part, then there's the part about facing Yerushalayim, and you have color pictures and globes and maps and all sorts of things. But who would you say that the Sefer is meant for?
I would say the Sefer is meant for anyone who davens. We daven 3 times a day. And one of the basics of davening is that we're facing Yerushalayim. It's something that we don't think about often, but especially now, coming off the 3 weeks and coming off of Tisha B'Av, and with our avelus over Yerushalayim's history in our minds and our hopes and aspirations for Yerushalayim's future. So this sugya is a fantastic sugya to go through, because it's not just a technical sugya, which is extremely enjoyable because it explains a metzias, which is so different than what we were expecting before we began. But as well, it's a sugya that as we go through it, puts firmly into our minds that every time we get up to daven and a group of men are meeting somewhere at a rest stop or wherever it is, the question is not which way is Mizrach. The question is which way is Yerushalayim. And that's something that will boost our tefillos. And Be'ezer Hashem, as Hashem promised Shlomo HaMelech, it will help our tefillos to be answered in the way that we hope.
Amen. And with that, I will put, as I said before, a link in the show notes for those interested in purchasing it. You can check it out on Feldheim's website. You can go to your local farm store, as you mentioned before. Also, I'll include your email in the show notes for those interested in emailing or reaching out to you. And with that, thank you, Rabbi Yosef, for joining me.